the stories, the journey, the wild behind the scenes, and much more. I'm Dave Anthony, and I'm the host of From Garage to Stadiums. We touched on Bruce's political activity and community support. He has supported veterans. He's raised awareness for food banks at various concert stops. He supported African relief by donating his services to a music tour in the 90s featuring Sting, Peter Gabriel, and others. Bruce even played a key role in AIDS awareness when he recorded the song Streets of Philadelphia for the soundtrack of the movie Philadelphia, starring Tom Hanks as an AIDS victim unfairly discriminated against by his employer. When Bruce lived in LA in the early 90s, he became aware of the desperation of migrant workers who live illegally and risk their health to provide for their families. And he writes a song that touches on his love for author John Steinbeck and parallels of these migrant families to the poor families in Steinbeck's book, The Grapes of Wrath, with his song, The Ghost of Tom Joad. Tom Joad, of course, being the main character in that book.
He wanted that to be something that the world, the nation, and then the world was going to hear loud and clear. And He also sort of knew that he had, or suspected that he had, the ability as a performer.
We've got a few minutes left, Peter. I want to touch on something that's important, which is his complex personality. On one hand, he's this everyman, hangs out in bars, visits friends in New Jersey, sees his aunts, writes about all these people. And on the other hand, you have a control freak in the studio who does 300 takes of one song, putting the band through the paces. And you hint at some narcissism there. And I just want you to sort of comment on this complexity of this man.
Hint at. Listen, if there's one person who's well acquainted with Bruce's narcissism and his being an attention whore, as he calls it, it's Bruce. And Bruce he's been in therapy for, 45 years at this point, and he's incredibly familiar with his own, his foibles. And among them are, one of the fixed costs of knowing and dealing with Bruce is the fact that he's Bruce Springsteen. He's a huge rock star, and he knows it, and he can be remarkably sweet and generous and kind and thoughtful, but he can also be very focused on what Bruce Springsteen needs at any given moment and he's built, but that's just what he is, and it's like, if you want to, he's not mean about it. He's not a jerk. He can be sort of self-involved, but welcome to the world of artists. So he's a complicated, conflicted guy. But as one person told me before I met him, someone who knew him really well, I said, "What's Bruce like?" And this guy goes, "He's exactly who you think he is." By which he meant, so listen to a Bruce Springsteen record. Who do you think that guy is? He's funny, he's smart, he's complicated, he's dark, he's hopeful, he's angry, he's all those things.
Yeah, that's a really interesting perspective. So Bruce puts out more albums in the years that follow, yielding some minor hits, but one of America's great tragedies brings Bruce to the forefront again and speaks to his connection to the common man. On 9/11 in 2001, over 3,000 people died with the collapse of the World Trade Center towers in New York. And what happens next is almost hard to fathom, but speaks to the power of Bruce's songwriting. Several people's obituaries from that fateful day mention Bruce as their favorite artist and how meaningful his songs had been. Bruce personally called or wrote each of these families to express his sympathies to those families and his appreciation for their love of his music. He also released an album, The Rising, that speaks to the 9/11 tragedy. He writes about firemen risking their safety to enter burning towers. He writes about the shattered lives and rebirth that will happen. One of the songs that gets tremendous reception is the title track called The Rising. What are 3 songs you'd pick for the audience that tell a story or a theme or something, like B-sides, some story about Bruce, or some thematic? What would you pick as 3 songs the audience should give a listen to?
Like the songs that I go back to somehow the most, even though I love so much of his work. But I think Racing in the Street from Darkness on the Edge of Town It's
Yeah,
just a
great tune.
song that for me, it just sort of tells the whole story, just in terms of like, this is a great snapshot of what Bruce is as a songwriter, what his vision is, what his milieu is. And that's, and it's that song about the street racer who, ends up, it starts off with this guy telling you what kind of car he's got and what kind of gear it's loaded up with, and it's sitting in the parking lot of the 7-Eleven, which is like as real as it gets. You can smell that cheesy popcorn they have there, in the, and by the end of the song, it takes this incredible journey where, he picks up his girl and they're going to drive to the sea and wash these sins off their hands. And that journey from the 7-Eleven parking lot to some kind of dark transcendence, on the beach is, for me, amazing. And the journey, and what Springsteen, that's the Springsteen stuff that resonate with me the most. Another song of his that I just absolutely love, that's more of a hidden gem, it's actually a demo, I think, called County Fair. That's just this beautiful portrait of, not the small town in the summer and what happens when the county fair comes and how exciting it is. And you go ride on the Ferris wheel with your girl. And, but he talks at one point about this little band that they've got on the bandstand, 2 guitars, bass and drums, and there's something just so sweet and so, so beautiful about his just description of what it's like to dance outside under the stars at the county fair, listening to a little rock and roll band that I love. And then one of my favorite latter-day songs of his, just because I love the writing, is called, it's off of Western Stars, and it's called Drive Fast, the Stuntman, close paren, and it's sung in the voice. That record is, I just think, an absolutely top drawer Bruce Springsteen record. I think it stands with Born to Run. I think it stands with Darkness, among certainly my favorite Springsteen records, because the writing is so sophisticated and the milieu, and, he's revisiting this kind of desert Southwest world that he writes about in Darkness. Only these characters aren't in their late 20s, they're in their 60s. And they're dealing with adulthood from the other end of, the process. Their relationships and their regrets and their failures and their triumphs.
What do you think his place in music history is when we all look back someday? What will he be remembered for?
I think that the sort of, the magical thing he did of blending Elvis's visceral sort of impact with Dylan's intellectual, poetic type of voice, and being able to really express something really profound and honest about the experience of being an ordinary American. I think the fact that Bruce has spent most of his adult life, as an extremely successful rock star who has been extraordinarily wealthy, doesn't ever really get in the way of his comprehension and his visceral knowledge of what it feels like to struggle from day to day, because that's who he was. That's who his family was. And that's, to some extent, who his friends still are. I've been with him in Freehold, walking around, and the people who call out to him, who he hangs out and talks to, are just the kids that he grew up with, and they've known him since they were all, in short pants. And he knows them. He's with them. He runs his errands in the same place that they do. And it's, and that's, he is, like that guy said to me, whenever that was 15 years ago, and he said, Bruce is exactly who you think he is. Listen to those records. He's a very sophisticated writer. He's extremely smart, but he knows exactly what it feels like to be a working class, struggle through your days type of guy.
If you want to read one of the incredible journeys of a rock star who has stayed the voice of the common man while reaching the stadium level superstardom, I urge you to pick up Peter's book, Bruce. And Peter, it's been a pleasure having you here today on Garage to Stadiums.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.